Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Larry Kuhn. I'm glad that you've joined us today. We are here today to talk about the challenge that we have with hidden agendas and office politics. The goal of this presentation today is a part of our operational psychology activity that we're providing virtual events twice a month. Ours today, the goal is to help you understand hidden agendas and how they thrive and to uncover them and really get insight into what's going on if you've ever led a team. Also, to use coalition building skills to neutralize uh, toxic dynamics that we often see in the workplace, and then to cultivate leader habits that foster psychological and interactional safety and trust. By the time that you stay with us, this is going to be a half an hour presentation. By the time that we get done with this, we hope that we'll be able to have passed along to you some very specific tools that you can use in the workplace, and we'll come to that in just a second. You know, it's a real challenge if we want to get things done through people. And today I'm going to be joined shortly by Dr. Brian Armstrong, and we're going to unpack this very problem. If you've ever tried to step in to lead a team, whether it's a meeting, an initiative, just have an idea that you're talking about and you want to come up with a better idea. If you bring at least three people together to make a decision, it's likely going to get very messy. You're going to have three different opinions about what we think we ought to do. You see, the underbelly of office politics and hidden agendas really is connected to the roles that we play, particularly in the workplace. If you've ever been on a team, you can see these roles emerge. The skeptic will question assumptions and challenge ideas. Often they mistrust easy answers. The avoider will do their role and they'll withdraw from conflict. If things start to get really squirrely and they're uncomfortable, then they want to keep a low profile and they try to reduce tension or risk disengagement, meaning they'll just hold back and maybe become what we call a social loafer. They wait for others to do it. Of course, you always have a cast of characters that includes the dominator who takes charge, sometimes over speaking or pushing their agenda. There's a harmonizer that will come in and sensing tension, they will try to build consensus and they'll soothe conflict and make it look like there's really not a problem and they'll push for cohesion. The visionary is often the one who is thinking big picture, and a lot of times they're the one that's leading the meeting. They're creative and future oriented. The executor is the one who's action oriented. They're pushing for us to do something. All of these are players, and we don't necessarily say, well, this is who I'm going to be, but that's often the role that we move toward. The analyzer, of course, is the one who's kind of like the accountant, very data driven, very cautious. They rely on evidence, and they can oftentimes build a coalition with the skeptic and the challenger who pushes back against what wants to be done. Where the visionary says, let's get this done. And they're in the background almost resisting moving forward. Then you have the supporter who is championing and encouraging and trying to build morale and maybe not even connected with the content of what we're talking about. There may sometimes be a victim who, feeling the stress, feels like it's unfair and they're becoming irritable. And often it's under the surface and it seeps out sometimes. Then there's the adapter who can always land on their feet and pretty much bridge gaps and help to try to build resilience. Then there's the joker who's sensing that there's a lot of tension, will do crazy things to distract. It is like herding cats, and it can be eye-opening if you have never moved into that leadership role to try to get things done through people. And sometimes it's disheartening. There is really an entire spectrum of personalities, needs, goals, conflict styles, and strategies, and people will fall along a spectrum between being highly engaged and sometimes conflictual and violently engaged, all the way to the other end of being very disengaged, avoiding, and silent, and just watching and not participating. Most people are really not prepared for that type of train train wreck to happen, and it inevitably occurs. And then what do we do? So I want to introduce now Dr. Brian Armstrong. He's going to talk a little bit about why this topic is important.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Kuhn. Appreciate the time today. It's interesting the whole notion that we're going to be getting at with politics and workplace conflict. I want to talk through the idea a little bit and then share a small story, something that I experienced. So, what inevitably happens is that what's at stake. Uh, it what's at stake is that the project or the effort in front of the team is going to fail to execute because of the energy that's sucked away from that effort. But I want to highlight the train wreck is avoidable. And it's important to look up the tracks, to use that metaphor, to see why folks are behaving this way. As Dr. Larry said, that there's motivators, there's values, there are other pieces in place of why people behave this way. And so it's important to understand what's leading to the train wreck. In a less safe, more toxic work environment, there's a natural tendency to self-protect. That's going to be true in any environment, but in this case, we're talking about work environments. And aside from the product or the project, what's at stake, and therefore the thing that will be protected most, is someone's ego. Office politics are grounded in individual ego when people place their personal success ahead of the team's or the organization's success, where they feel that what they need to protect or value or build on is more important than, if you will, what's at play or what's at stake for everyone. This can be interpersonal. It can be two people fighting over personal agendas because they feel some need to score, win, make sure their fingerprints are on projects, see their work progress, or have some level of validation that they're seen, heard, and valued. I want to spend time on those last 3 points because they're critical. Being seen, heard, and valued is important. It's critical to a trusting relationship, to forming a healthy work environment and a place or a culture of belonging. Those are part of a healthy work environment. When they are absent or absent enough, given someone's own level of insecurity, then they move towards acting out, and they will aim to be noticed, and then they'll leverage that to acquire their personal accomplishment, to fill their need, to satisfy their ego. Let's also assume, though, that it's not just between two people. What happens when leaders get involved? And by that, I mean, of course, people that are in charge of larger organizations, have teams of people reporting to them. When leaders get involved in political maneuvering, or worse, the members of their teams get involved in it, then the organization at large, the teams, get wrapped up into this conflict, into the drama. And that's where morale, productivity, and ultimately the culture pays the price for the conflict. Team members may align behind their leader out of a sense of loyalty, real or manufactured, and they can become pawns in the conflict, brewing between their leaders. This can look like delays on projects, a lack of sharing information, poor communication, and fundamentally organizational misalignment. If we think about the phrase an organization, it's organized towards a purpose. If the pieces are misaligned, that purpose is not going to be met well or without significantly extra energy. Typically, this is referred to as organizational silos, where work and processes aren't coordinated between functions and organizations. Silos result in increased costs, delays, low morale, which, like we've mentioned, and it's a place where people within the same organization are fighting each other. They're placing blame, they're carrying grudges, and often passive aggressively trying to one up or outdo each other. I say this separate from a healthy sense of internal competition, but more of a sense of we'll win at all costs. This is kind of like the dark side of team identity. It's a small group identity, small group morale, where it's an us against them rather than we're in this together, how are we winning? There's a interesting cognitive bias that's behind some of this. Cognitive bias, of course, is where we've got a thinking process and we've got a tendency or preference to lean or jump to conclusions somewhere. This bias is called fundamental attribution error, and that happens where we tend to identify our actions as permissible and someone's actions as something we'll critique, especially when these actions are negative, such as organization politics. What happens then in fundamental attribution error is that we ascribe their behavior to a personality flaw, a characteristic. It's who they are rather than and separate from something that they're doing. It's a trick that our mind, individual or collective in the sense of a team, it's a trick that allows us to rationalize our decisions, explain them so we can sleep at night, so we can look at ourselves in the mirror. But it also separates us or demonizes our opposition. And let me acknowledge that sounds dramatic, but it can sound as simple as we had to do X because, and insert a reason, a defensible position. But they were just out to sink our project. They were out to sabotage us. They wanted to beat us at all costs, even if they were unethical, immoral, whatever the judgment might be. Fundamental attribution error sounds like we're the good guys because what we did was reasonable, but they're the bad guys because that's who they are. It starts to place people in an unfair judgment, an unfair categorization, but it also permits organizational politics, because then the next step is maneuvering, it's working around them, it's withholding information, and it's doing those much more toxic behaviors that are not part of an organization or a team working together.
So, Brian, I was thinking you may have an example. Um, you and I were talking prior to this, and you told me a story about how that happened, and you actually observe it. Can you relate that to us now?
Oh, absolutely. So a story that I experienced was at the heart of this. I was part of a high stakes planning meeting, and there were about 25 to 30 people in the room. We were scheduled for about 4 hours. If you will, offline, we'd estimate the meeting was probably over $100,000 meeting if you want to cost out the meeting. So it was an investment. Just the meeting itself was an investment. We sat down. The leader came in the room and pitched the idea, gave us our charge. About 12 minutes into this 4-hour meeting, a brave soul, and if I think about the people, they may have been the skeptic, they may have been the challenger. I don't think they were playing the role of Joker. I'll be clear on that. But they asked a very brave question, which was, has a decision been made? Let me clarify. The charge was that this group of people, high-level folks, management, consultants, we're going to design from the ground up a leadership program and pull from existing material and really, debate it out and work it out and create the best program we could. Charged with 4 hours, 12 minutes in, somebody says, hey, has a decision been made? And the leader took a deep breath, looked at this whole room and said, yes. And then in about 2 minutes, literally outlined what the program was going to be. This person followed up with a powerful question. What's the rest of this meeting intending to do? And the leader, I'm not sure where the honesty came from at that point, but they said, to make you all feel like you were involved. The politics in play was, it broke credibility, it broke trust. The immediate outcome was these 25 people all kind of separated out. Some folks disappeared for about a 3-hour cup of coffee. Some folks just left and got together events. When people finally got back together, because the job was the job, the work was, half-hearted. There was a lot of those other personalities that we saw, skepticism, distrust. At the end of the day, there was never the same level of trust with that leader. At the end of the day, while the team bonded to a degree, there was high skepticism for the organization. Within 2 years, that program had lived its life and dismantled and became, somewhat jokingly, a flavor of the month, flavor of the year, if you will. Nearly every single team member on that team either left the team or left the organization within 2 years because of we'll say the politics that were in play. The impact was, while a goal was met and while the expediency of politics got it there, the overall organizational impact became negligible at a high expense, both financially but also through personnel.
What it sounds like, it really is a matter of trust. It's not really about a matter of conflict that is always going to come up when you bring people together. The fundamental question the question behind the question sometimes is about trust. It makes sense. that people actually struggle with transparency. In 1972, here was some research I found that 50% of Americans would agree with the statement that most people can be trusted. By 2018, and then now it's fallen even a little bit lower, the Pew Foundation found that that number had fallen to just 1 in 3. So it's less than a third would agree with that statement. So what we're doing when we have people that we're bringing together, there are a number of things that are going on behind the scenes that have nothing to do with us or the content of what we're doing. They fundamentally have a mistrust of people to begin with. Add to that the idea of attachment. As a psychologist, I understand about attachment. I like to ask a question of people. Can you remember a time in your life when your primary caregiver, whether it was a parent, grandparent, or someone, when you were hurting either psychologically or physically, they were available and responsive to meet your need and not their need? My own anecdotal evidence has been it's usually about 70% of the people that I ask that question to that they go, I can't remember a time when they responded to meet my need. It was always about them. But the actual literature shows that about 50% of people in general, these are people in your team, likely have insecure attachment. They're feeling anxious, avoidant, or disorganized in terms of their attachment style and how they connect with people. So you combine that with a fundamental mistrust, 50% of them have insecure attachment. And then at the same time, many of them are motivated by two things. Number one, people are highly motivated to look good. That means that they need acceptance, they need esteem that they're deriving from other people, and they need respect. So they're highly motivated to look good. But even more than that, people are even more highly motivated not to look bad. So when you bring these cats in and you're herding them into the room, you're trying to get things done through people. We've got mistrust fundamentally. We've got our attachment styles. And then we have a whole lot of people that are very motivated not to look bad. That means they have self doubts. They have flaws that they won't let other people see. They fear that if they're discovered, they'll be shamed, rejected, or criticized. So when we say, hey, let's all be transparent here, it can be very, very difficult because people fear making mistakes. And this is why I think that it's important for us when we think about these hidden agendas that are going on here. Yes, it's very toxic, but it really makes a lot of sense. People need psychological safety, and that means interactional safety. It is incumbent upon leaders to navigate these pitfalls. And that's why I thought that it would be good for Brian to come in today and to talk to us a little bit about how can we have some strategies where we can prepare for these challenges as well as mitigate them. So Brian, go ahead and talk a little bit about that. What can people do from your perspective to help navigate away from this high risk of a train wreck?
Absolutely. And I want to go back to something that was shared to get into this. And addressing office politics, challenging silos, is fundamentally the work of leaders. Something I stumbled into and have shared probably too often across my career is that leadership would be easy if it wasn't for the people.
Sorry.
Well, see, is
There
my
it is.
people. There it is.
Aren't these-
And the other piece of that is leaders wouldn't be leaders if they weren't doing the hard work of leadership. And so tackling the issues like this is one of the primary hard parts of leadership. And so two pieces, and not to overly simplify this, but it's preparation. If we don't acknowledge that we're going to have to address this, then we're not doing leadership work. And so that's, asking questions like, how are we meeting and why are we meeting? What is this about? That sounds pretty simple, but it's about getting into frameworks, getting into structures about how, if you will, the people systems, the organizational systems of how an organization is operating and where are the cracks, where is the misalignment. It's also about being purposely inclusive during decision making. Who are you bringing to the table? Who's not present at the table and why not? And to the degree that it makes sense, being explicitly clear about decision making. The decision's been made, throw it out there. Get on, get people on board. If you're going to invite people to a decision, do that and do it honestly, not like the story I shared. As a leader, what are you tracking? How are people talking to each other? Are they talking past each other? Is it constructive? Is it collaborative or is it adversarial? Are people positioning? There's this great theory from, honestly, the 1950s about the Tuckman cycles: forming, storming, norming, performing. A lot of us have heard those phrases, but are people talking nice? Are they talking and fighting? Are they building? Or are they holding each other accountable and moving forward? And bottom line for leaders in preparation, it's demonstrating leadership courage to address politics head on, identify those common goals, behavioral expectations, and hold people accountable from a behavioral perspective. The other half then is mitigation. When these things pop up, then jumping in and doing that both authentically and through a couple great steps. And Larry, I think you've got a great resource to share about that.
I do, of course. So I was prepared, and this is important for leaders who are doing this to be prepared. And then what do you do in the moment? So I came up with 7 building blocks for credible authenticity. Without knowing it, sometimes we can just step into it and end up reducing trust and not even know about it. We put together a white paper that all of the participants in this, if you're watching this today, will make that available to you, and I'll send it to you afterwards. But here are some of the things that I was thinking about in terms of building blocks for credible authenticity. First of all, we need to build reliability. And that means instead of dropping the ball, we need to follow through on our promises. We need to have relatability. Instead of magnifying the differences between us, I wonder what it would be like if we started looking for common areas outside of those differences. Diversity is important, but I think it's kind of important as well that we be able to look for the common needs that we have, and that's where we can connect. We also need to consider our reputation, making sure in the moment that we don't discredit other people just to talk about ourselves. Ask a question in the moment. What do you think this is going to impact for you? We can realize that our reputation does precede us. And tell me more about some of the success stories that you've had in this particular thing. Giving people and creating space. This is the idea here. Creating space where trust can emerge rather than only being conflictual. One of the things that I discovered a long time ago when I was doing work with teams, I discovered that there's what we talk about and there's how we talk about it, the process piece. Most of the time, we think we're just looking at the content and we're only dealing with that data. There's a whole lot more going on, and I like to shift the attention occasionally back and forth between what we're talking about and in the moment, how are we talking about it? So, for instance, let's say Brian and I are talking. I might say to him something like, going to the process, hey, I noticed that when I said that, you seem to have a reaction to that. What was going on there? Tell me about that. Tell me more. These are things that build credible authenticity in the moment. Sometimes it just works for us to be real. We need to be ready, to be responsive, available, visible to people, and then be real. And that means sometimes disclosing our own fears, our own thoughts, our own feelings, and being transparent. Something like this, for instance. Hey, Brian, when you were saying that, I found myself wondering, how is that going to work because of this problem? So now I'm reporting in on how I was thinking or feeling without threatening and saying, Brian, that was a crazy idea. I believe that we really need relationships is to be real. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the way you're saying that. It's a metaphor that I think comes to mind is if we were driving a car and the check engine light came on, or we heard a tire pop and we just pedaled down, fundamentally kept driving through, we might get to our destination, but the vehicle's broken and our passengers are probably scared witless. If we pause and pay attention to those warning signs, again, process awareness, that's where we can, I'm probably really stretching this metaphor, we can manage our vehicle, which means we can take care of our process, our way of accomplishing our work, and still get to our destination, but do it with more faith and trust and connection with each other rather than getting there, and pun intended, everything falling apart.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of that, a lot of times, just in being real with people, is creating space where others can criticize. I mean, let's say, hey, you may see this differently. What can I do more or less of, Brian, that would help in this particular problem? That opens up the space for you to say, here's what I see. And I'm like, might even say something like this. Brian, I want you to know I give you permission, or in some case, Brian, can I have your permission to give you some feedback about something that I was just thinking and feeling as you were saying that? Now I've asked you to give me your permission, and then I can drop the bombshell because now I'm reflecting on my own reaction to it rather than it being about your credibility. Finally, it's a good idea just to have our ducks in a row and have a good, rational, objective explanation. We need to recognize that people do have both cognitive and emotional appeal and thoughts about that experience of whatever we're doing. So, again, this white paper will follow, and I'll send this up to you. I am really excited about what is coming up on the horizon. And I just wanted to give you an idea that we put together at AspireView some cohorts where you can connect in if you've taken some assessments, maybe do some coaching. Just want you to know about that this resource is available. But in 2 weeks on the 17th, I'm really excited to announce that we're going to have a full hour panel on the topic of generations and generational intelligence. We've heard a lot about emotional intelligence and social intelligence, but I think in the workplace, we really need now, given that there are 4 different generations within our workplaces and more coming, we need to have better intelligence around how to navigate those rather than being divided. We need to find ways to bring commonality. And we're going to have a panel of experts on who are going to talk about that. Really excited about that. Thank you for joining us.